You guys are probably anxious to get done with the financial statements, the worksheets and workbook, and move on to other portions of this business plan. And you're kind of in luck, except one last thing that we need to do for the financials is a narrative of the financials. Okay, so we've spent our time, putting together the startup, our payroll projections, our operating expenses, our sales, etc. And now we need to explain those in a narrative form. This narrative need not be real long. Your project, by the way, your overall project is going to be, quite extensive, with appendix items, documents that we're going to have in the appendix, etc. It wouldn't surprise me that some of your projects approach 100 pages, some even over that. And part of that is the financials that we just finished, which is 10 or 15. If we were to separate those and print them out separately, it'd be 10 or 15 pages. So it's time now to start the writing portion, and the financial narrative is where we're at. Really, you can choose maybe different ways to set it up. Probably the most logical is just in the order that they are. And what's important is to not just tell me what the numbers are, right? I can open up your workbook and look at the numbers, okay? That's not to say you won't mention the number. Sure, you will. You'll say, hey, we need $15,000 in working capital because our operating expenses average about $2,500 per month. Okay, so it's that type of explanation that you kind of need. Our equipment expense or equipment purchases are $10,000 because we're buying XY machine and ZA machine and etc. And what the dollar values may be of each of those. And if there's a ton of things, don't go through them ad nauseum. It's okay to throw them together into one piece and say, we're going to invest $10,000 in these 100 different things that we need for our particular business. So be kind of practical about that. A couple pages is probably fairly normal to get through that. While you're doing that, don't ignore, I was going to bring up the sheet, but don't ignore let me get the template out, the tabs that are on the back end of this thing. Certainly we didn't, I didn't ask that you necessarily spend a lot of time looking at those, but now's the time. Okay, so take a look at those tabs. I know for one project I commented that I thought maybe their projections were a little bit high, but when I looked at the break-even analysis, it looked fairly reasonable. Okay, and so look at the break-even analysis and kind of see where you're at. I like to discuss, or I like to, as a former banker, I always looked at break-evens. Oftentimes I had to calculate my own. The financial ratios, maybe take a look at those if they're important for your particular industry, your particular business. Maybe. The diagnostic tools, this might be a case where you could look some of these up. Gross margins as a percent of sales. If you're in the shoe business, and I think somebody selected a shoe store, well, guess what? I looked up Foot Locker. I wanted to see what their margins were, and I can easily get to their financial statements online and take a look at what their margins are, what their gross margins are, what their cost of goods sold are, and then what their gross margins are, and kind of compare that then, right? And if you have some other questions, maybe some smaller businesses and whatnot, where there's not a public company where you can do that, again, feel free to get a hold of Bear Paw Development Company, talk to Joe LaPlante or Tiffany Melby. Tiffany's actually doing some teaching for us this year, and they've both said they're more than willing to look up some of those things. They have access to some resources where you might be able to find it, But you might spend 2 days finding it, and a phone call to them, might take you 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So do that. Cost of goods calculator, only if you have it. The amortization and depreciation, there's kind of good stuff there, but not a lot of stuff that you're probably going to talk about in your financial narrative. So the break-even analysis, maybe these diagnostic tools, look through them, and maybe the financial ratio. So don't ignore that. But on these, the income statement, really when we get down to that, we're going to be talking about the bottom right-hand corner, what our net income is. And then the growth of that is what you're going to talk about through the next couple of years. Maybe why it's going to grow, because our sales are going to exceed, our growth in sales is going to exceed our growth in expenses, and those types of issues. And balance sheet, same things. You're going to look at some of the things that are important here, maybe declining debt, maybe increasing cash. By the third year, our cash is going to be up to X. Our total equity is a big deal. Our equity grows from first year $5,000 to by the time we're in the third year, we're up to $25,000. All those types of positive things that you really want to stress, okay, as you're going to be making this pitch to a lender or possibly an investor. That kind of covers it, good writing, make sure you're good paragraphs, good spelling, good sentences, short and concise sentences are the best when you're writing for a business, any kind of a business paper. Keep those sentences short and concise. About any time you have an end or a but, you can probably put a period and start a new sentence. So that should do it. That'll give you something to get started. Have a good, warm weekend.